Right, let's get into the show. In part one, we laid out the erasing of Russian history and, more importantly, its people. 70 to 90 million of them between 1917 and 1945, and more followed after that. A country taken over by Zionists. Hello, Mr. Greenberg. Yes, I said Zionists, and I don't care. With an agenda that encompasses finance, land grab, resource stealing, and complete wiping out of all that are not part of their agenda. People will say, well, you don't really believe some people would want to wipe out 90% of the population. That's ridiculous. My answer is, they've already done that in several individual countries globally. They wiped out close to, or possibly beyond, 90% of the cream of a single nation in Russia. They killed over 90% of all American indigenous peoples also. 20 million went down to 800,000. They wiped out totally or near to extinction various other tribal peoples also, be it in the Amazon, the Maoris, the Africans, the Pygmies, or the Aboriginals. 1/3 of Europe was wiped out via the Black Plague. It should be named the Black Sun Plague, which then reached Asia and the Middle East. Do you think that was an accident? Millions of people across Europe were displaced and killed between the 1500s and 1700s at the behest of the Roman Catholic Church. Whole towns eradicated in Spain, France, Portugal, and the UK, to name but a few. And that is a fact that only a few are aware of. They razed them all to the ground by fire, to erase history or the knowledge. Or the fact that not only were they not content in having World War I that killed vast quantities of people, they laid the foundation for another theatre of operations and another war 20 years later. That was all arranged and signed for in a treaty in 1922-23 for World War II. They also introduced the Spanish flu, all in the same year, 1919. That flu alone killed an estimated 500 million people. And I could go on for the whole show in itself, giving examples of the dark atrocities. But if you don't see what they have done in the past, that plays out in our present, then you are incapable of any useful input or value into society. When knowledge was not available, people had an excuse. Now, ignorance is a choice. Was Part 1's piece harsh on certain religions and cultures? Yes. And I will make no apologies for that whatsoever. It has to be said. And I think it's beyond time that the full truth of the dark past and the agendas of this world was brought to light and faced up to, processed and dealt with once and for all. If you're a part of the religions and cultures that were mentioned in Part 1, you have an obligation to change from within your own circles. A failure to do so makes you complicit in their actions. You can't sit back as a Catholic and ignore the vast crimes against humanity committed by that organisation, thinking everything will be okay if I just go to church or read some ancient book. of which you have no definitive proof if it's real or valid. Praying has saved no one, in case you haven't noticed. 4.5 billion people all pray each day to their various gods to come and save them, their country, or save their religion. You would think with that amount of effort and free will choice, something would change. But it hasn't, has it? No one came. No one is coming to save you or anybody else. And it's one giant trick that's being played on the whole of a planet by the dark forces to make you inactive and seeking an external source, when the answers all along were internal. The answer was you. The God you have sought or prayed to outside of you was always within you. You are the Saviour. You always were. You just forgot. And it's time to remember, he thinks. Hi all and welcome back. One piece I forgot to remind people before we get into the show again is Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will have an extra show. I have no idea what to call it yet. It covers so many topics that it's not easy to define, but I'm sure I will come up with a title before then and post it tomorrow. But that will be this Saturday, and it will be another of the From Must Listen To series, and it will trigger. Right, so we're going back to the Vedas and the Dark War, Dark and Light War, going back 7,000 years and 5,000 years ago, which is still playing out today. And there was an attempt to win the war with genetics. And we mentioned briefly in part one of the genetic alterations on both sides. And the Urs teachers had stayed in ancient India in order to bring the light of knowledge to the Dravidian and Naga tribes, and also to change their genetic qualities for the better. Now, according to the Indian legends, 7 white teachers, Rishi, came from the North High Mountains, the Himalayas, and brought to the local populace the Vedas and the new Vedic beliefs, which in the course of time were distorted and transformed into Hinduism, but not repeated. No, there's dark elements in it. And just like the term Sanskrit is not from India or the East either, but it is an old Russian language. But the Urs were also geneticists, and they also tried to change the genetics of the dark infected races, and also end the reign of the dark forces here. 7 white teachers, the Urs, knew perfectly the connection between the cyclical and behavioural reactions and the human genetics. They understood that worshipping the Kali Ma, the Black Mother, for thousands of years was not something accidental, but the consequences of the resonance of this cult with psychical and behavioural features inherent to the genetics of the black race that were in India and also Africa. These properties and qualities showed up especially strongly through the X chromosomes of the black race, because in a genetically pure black woman, each X chromosome strengthens the dominant properties of another X chromosome, which causes a substantial mutual strengthening of their properties and qualities, and creating a brightly pronounced female dominant. Now, understanding this, the Ers teachers had to change the genetic code of the Dravidian and Naga tribes, adding some fragments of the white race genetics. What this is telling you is the black race at that time was seeded with not only voodoo, which is not nice anywhere, but their DNA was encoded with aggression and violence. That's what it's telling you. They conducted this genetic correction everywhere in order to block negative psychical and behavioral reactions in the tribes of the black and yellow races, which had appealed to them for help. So this is important and was overlooked when I first read this. Both the yellow and black tribes recognized they had a problem and requested the solution from the Ers, and so was not forced upon them, like the sub-grey race vaccine industry now. Big difference. Most tribes which the Ers teachers resettled from Asia to North and South America underwent this kind of genetic correction, and this migration had lasted until the Bering Strait as we now know it. It was called the Bering Isthmus, between Kamchatka and Alaska disappeared. And what this is saying is further proof of what was revealed later in this series. There are no American Indians. Let me clarify that. Those Indians came from India. Now, there was a Native American tribe here before that, and those two races mixed over time, and this explains the variance in their colours. Now, in the case of the black race, the white Ers teachers came across a special situation when their own genes added to a genetic cauldron were not enough to get the necessary qualitative changes in the psychical and behavioural reactions in the race as a whole. And the active X chromosome did not give this possibility because of the reasons indicated above, and moreover, the other 22 chromosomes also possessed their active properties that were handed down by the female side. So in other words, it reacted to it. So the Ers applied a new principle of genetic engineering to create a new sub-race. They used passive, which is recessive, masculine chromosomes of the black race. Not the females, the males. And for this purpose, they used the cells of yellow masculine marrow out of the yellow race as the most suitable for this purpose. And when these cells divide, they produce the white blood cells, which have many functions, the main one of which is a building one. So it's rebuilding the DNA from being violent and aggressive to more passive. The bloodstream delivers the white blood cells to tissues where they form one or another cell necessary for the human multicellular organism. Well, the yellow marrow is located in the cavities of the bones of the human skeleton, including ribs, and the simplest way to obtain the yellow marrow with minimal consequences for the human organism is to extract it out of a rib. Now, most likely, it was an Ers teacher who was responsible for the genetic correction and had a powerful PSI field immersed in Adam, quote unquote, into deep hypnotic sleep and took yellow marrow from his rib, as was described in the Bible. This is what that was talking about. Now, until recently, genetic engineering was declared science fiction. So what can we say about the Dravidian and Naga people for whom the abilities of the Urs were obviously seen as in some way supernatural? Well, what happened is these tribes then regarded them as the gods. Now, the so-called American Indians, which I'm going to make a deliberate distinction. There is American Indians and there's the Native American. They are not one and the same. Expressed exactly the same kind of reaction, and they also worship the white teachers like gods as well. And this is what happens when ETs come down. They have technology and people think, oh, these are the gods, they have so much better than us. No, they're not. We'll get into that later. White teachers abandoned these tribes when they began to bring in or bring back their honor human sacrifices. That's what the whole genetics was about, to stop them sacrificing their own people to these fake dark forces and dark gods. And they rejected a request to stop doing this by against the Urs teachers. Now the Hopi and other tribes of Native Americans all talk of the Great White Brotherhood returning. They always explain it's not the same as the current white man, but the old white man. And I think it's safe to say this brotherhood was the Urs. So what did the Urs do? Well, they took the marrow cells from the black Negroid race, man, and they changed a passive Y chromosome into a passive X chromosome. As a result, it united with passive chromosomes of the black race that was inherited from men when they had artificially created a double set of female chromosomes with a passive set of features. And the result was a hybrid grey subrace female embryo. That was the result, a hybrid grey subrace with a female embryo. Now these embryos using ova from white women gave girls who now did not have psychical and behavioural properties inherent to the black race at the time, which made the representatives the latter of, which were then the conductors of, the dark forces. In essence, the dark forces had seeded the black race at the time with genetics that suited their image, not our image. Thus, the Judaic Eve, a woman of the grey subrace, was created according to the plan of its creators. She should have brought the descendants of the black race to light, not dark. For the genetic correction to be dominant in the descendants of the black race, some period of time must have passed for these changes to accumulate, as only when the number of carriers of the changed genetics reached critical quantity would then the genetic changes become irreversible and also dominant. So it required a period of time, which is kind of like what's happened in the last 60 years or so, with the introduction of higher frequency soul beings. It takes time. Unfortunately, the hierarchy of the Dark Forces did not allow that time to complete the process of genetic transformation. The creature parasites made a successful attempt to renew their destroyed system in the active sacred area, the biblical Eden, which was in India, using the remaining genetic manifestations. It was not full, but it was enough to turn back the process that the heirs had launched. Both the work done at the genetic level and the knowledge brought to the black race were unable to neutralize completely the possibility for the restoration of old habits. They die hard, as the saying goes. Thousands of years of the Black Mother worshipping had done the dirty deed. The new grey subrace that was bred by the heirs came to be the creature parasite's next victim. Now, this could be looked at in two ways. One of the dangers of meddling with creation and nature, and how it always appears to rebound back and bite you in the ass. Or two, in desperate times, desperate decisions have to be taken for the benefit of the all. And this was one of these cases, as the dark infection here was not just about here Midgard, but all the other Earths also. It had spread throughout the universe. Now, in the later episodes, I posited the theory whether the black race was seeded with the Dark Forces voodoo, which is a virus to all intents and purposes, before or after they arrived here. It is clear now it was before, and the black race were used as tools to bring about the destruction of the white race and the light forces. That's what this piece is telling you. Now, one can always argue via racism based on the colour of the skin, but racism becomes mute when it's a hidden item that is not viewable via our own eyes. Genetics is only viewable via technology. So any suggestion of racist overtones connected to this piece is rendered obsolete. It's a genetic issue, not a colour of the skin issue. And like I've said repeatedly, we have all been used by the Dark Forces. There were no omissions. The Vedas described man arriving here and the consequences of war, spreading to different spaces and realities, wise thinking creatures conducted by ancient, what was known as patron gods, which is not the god, explored and rendered habitable splendiferous uninhabited new earths of the light world of Nav, N-A-V, and after they had returned to the heavens. This was the way the harmonious worlds of Yav, Y-A-V, the inhabited world we have now, and Nav also. They are conceived in the light or the living light of joy, which the great primordial Ramha radiates, which is the sun. And it follows from the above that modern man appeared on Midgard Earth as a result of intentional migration from other Earths. Earth just means planet, it's not the name of this planet. The very fact that several races appeared here on Midgard Earth 35 to 40,000 years ago indicates that, one, the migrants came to our Earth from different Earths of our universe, which had similar climatic conditions but nevertheless not identical. Now, the humanoid races have been formed on each of these planets independently. They were physically, they were close to each other, but they all had different types of exchange processes. The colour of the skin was different, some distinctions in the skeletal structures, but these races also had different cyclical and behavioural reactions. That is conditioned by significant distinctions in their biochemistry. 2. Some distinctions within one and the same race are conditioned also by the fact that different tribes independently evolved on different planets, which had almost identical natural conditions, or they are representatives of one civilization, which had originated on one and the same planet and later settled on other planets with very close living conditions. 3. All migrants were placed in those climatic areas of Midgard-Earth which were maximally close to those of their native planets. Our planet was inhabited within a very short historical time period. Now, in the past, Midgard-Earth was part of the system of civilizations of this universe, all of which communicated mainly with the help of stargates or by the means of Vitmaras, which are interstellar ships. And the next verse describes this entirely. The priest, the keeper of ways, which went through the stargates, said to Perun the Thunderer, "Tell us, our wise teacher, what is happening in the great Svarga. Why have many gates been closed to Makosh, and Radha? Why do the crystals of motion not shine? Why has a quarter of the Zarbon circle grown dark? Why have the celestial needles lost their colour? Why do many Vitmanas not answer our call?" So this is making it clear that this planet, Midgard, was in connection with several other Earths and also constellations back then. But due to the war, everything was cut off due to the collapsing of the stargates during the war, with the dark forces and their weapons of total destruction. Now Perun answered them, "Know, keepers of the gate between worlds, that there is a great Asa in Svarga." Asa means war. The great battle is now taking place in Makosh, Radha, Svarti and Race, with alien warriors from hell. Their light guards from Prav smite the enemy hip and thigh and cleanse every palace of the world from the warriors of darkness which come from the dark world. That dark world was the black hole, the one that's just gone. Wasn't natural. Now, most likely the priests, the keeper of ways, which passed through these stargates, maintained and repaired these devices, which were intended for travelling between the stars and also the planets. A person entered into the stargate on one planet and exited on another. In order to realise similar transition, stargates have to be on both planets, a point A and a point B, and it folds over. But their damage or destruction on any planet made the contact impossible. So if it goes down on another planet, we can't go through that gate from our own, even if our own stargate is still open. It was explorer wanderers who installed these devices on Earth planets suitable for life. They moved within the universe on spaceships, the Vitmanas. These ships were used for different purposes, for long and short distance flights, for movement in space at different speeds, sometimes enormous ones, which was several times exceeded the velocity of light. But they were always limited because their building material, biometal, had limited capabilities. By biometal, it means you take the genetics of the driver of the craft and incorporate it into the metal of the craft. So the craft then becomes whoever is driving it. Or going at different speeds and through different densities of space is limited. That's what it's saying. Now, stargates were devices which forced space through, in other words, changed its dimensionality, so that within these stargates, two spatial points, which were situated at enormous distances from each other, sometimes millions or billions of light years, would close into one. And after the installation of these kind of devices, it was possible to shift from one planet to another almost instantaneously. Now, as a side note to this human soul vessel, or spirit I should say, not the vessel, has that capability to travel from point A to point B anywhere. And that created envy, because no other species can do it. That's why they started interfering with the genetics. And that's why they started wiping, because they couldn't match it. It's typical of the way the dark or psychopaths think. Because we can't match it or beat it, let's destroy it. And that's essentially what's going on. Now, these devices, the Stargates, were installed in several places on Midgard Earth, and all the main races of Homo sapiens came to our planet through them. Oops. What, you're telling me you were not native to here? Some are. Each race came through its own Stargate. The migrants settled in those climatic zones which were maximally close to the living conditions on their native planets. I'll explain more about that later. And there were many of these planets. So there were 4 galaxies who were engaged in Star Wars with the Dark Forces. The galaxy Makosh, which is Ursa Major. The galaxy Rada, which is now known as Orion. The galaxy Svarti, which is now known as Arcturus. And the galaxy race was Leo. And at the same time, the light forces liberated one constellation, which was called a Pallas back then, after another in these galaxies, which is known as worlds, from the warriors of darkness who came from the dark world, which is known as the Dark Galaxy. That's the black hole, the void. Many civilizations of these galaxies took an active part in this intergalactic war, including some civilizations which had transport connections with Midgard Earth. This means that first our Midgard Earth lost the transport connections with many of the other planets, and that the keepers of the gates between the worlds means galaxy, were unaware at the time of why the gates on these planets did not function. This suggests this was a surprise attack, and the Dark Forces wiped out the Stargates. And so it's like two people with a phone. If someone drops their phone and it smashes, you're not going to be able to contact the person you were talking to. And that's essentially what happened. And second, there were a great number of other planet Earths with which Midgard-Earth was able to make contact. And the gates were switched off on these planet Earths because they were in an area of military operations, and also there was a risk that the Dark Forces could take over and control them. If the Dark Forces had managed to take over the working gates, they could have quickly and unexpectedly appeared on many other planets at the same time, with which all the worlds mentioned had contact via the gates. Therefore, when a planet Earth was threatened to be taken by the Dark Forces, its gates were blocked immediately. And this kind of action was a precautionary measure, and Perrin tells you about this in the text. To protect from those spiteful enemies who converted flourishing earths to ashes, who shed the blood of innocent creatures and spared no one, neither young nor old. Many gates were closed in order that alien enemies could not get to the light earths of the great Svarga. And to prevent a repeat of Troora fate. Troora, yeah. Which had illuminated the worlds with its wise love in the light Rada, which is Orion. And we can clearly see now that Perrin had not been a god as we would know it. Although after the wars and all the teachings, he was considered as such afterwards. But he was just one of the hierarchs of the space light forces. We have to have a real understanding of the term God, which we've done in many shows, and we'll cover maybe later in this show, if not it's in greater depth in one of the other From Russia with Love shows. Now, Perrin arrived on Midgard-Earth with a mission to explain to the keepers of the Stargates of what was going on both in big space and on Midgard-Earth. And similarly, we may assume that all the other gods of the Slavonic Aryan Vedas occupied one or another position in the hierarchy of the light forces. That was in accordance, this is key to understand, was in accordance with their evolutional qualities and abilities. What this is telling you about is your soul development. You can't just put any jackass clown in high-level positions. Otherwise, you have what we have now. Look at the military. Go and bomb this country. Okay, yeah. Well, what have they done? No, just go and bomb them. Non-thinking people. Non-evolutional qualities or abilities. And that's what happens. You get a load of people who think they're leaders, but they're actually sheep. So this is in relation to your soul development of going through not only the 7 Midgard planes, but advancing through the 7 cosmic planes and the 7 universal planes. And any being who has done that become the teachers and the hierarchy of the light forces. That's how it works. And this is the real version of a quote, God, unquote. It is not the God, that is source. And it's an important distinction to make, as that whole term has been distorted on this planet into oblivion by the religions of this world. The Dark Forces wanted and still prevent beings here and many other worlds from developing beyond the lower astral plane of the subsequent Earths. For one, it stifles development, and two, it feeds the astral beasts who are under their control. And it is of interest how Perun describes to his listeners and subordinates on Midgard Earth the consequences of the Dark Forces attack that was launched against some planet Earths with which our planet had contact by means of the gates. Now Torora is deserted, left without life. The multi-gate circle is torn to pieces. Mountains are brought down on many needles, and only the ashes of the 7 Sazhens, which one Sazen is 7 feet, are there. So there was 49 feet of ash. Now the same image, sorrowful and cheerless, I saw in Ark Ulna on Ruta Earth, that had shined in light Makosh, the Great Bear, or Ursa Major. There's a reason why Russia's called the Great Bear. It's not a coincidence. And the gates between worlds are now fused stone. Celestial needles are roadside dust. All cities were destroyed by the strong flame that rose from Ruta's surface to the sky. There is no life on that earth anymore. Without sun, there are no plants, birds, and animals. Wind carries only ash to the valleys and fills up the canyons with it. It is a cheerless and quiet in the world of ruins, where once life dwelt everywhere. The Fash destroyer evaporated all rivers and seas, and the sky is filled with black clouds. Not a ray of light can pass through the pitch-dark gloom. Life will never come back to this world. The mention in that piece may well describe a current alt-media narrative, the Mud Flood. Mountains are brought down on many needles, it says, which means the mountains are the portals or the Stargate. Lake Titicaca is one of the most visible Stargates with the naked eye. And as it says, only the ashes 49 feet high remains. And that may well describe the mud flood here. As we're going to do it here. We'll be back shortly. Hi all and welcome back. So this Fash destroyer weapon, FASH, is described as an atomic or nuclear weapons by the Vedas. That's the same effect. And it could well be the name of the weapon that created all the deserts here. And because before these wars, we never had deserts. The North Pole and Siberia regions once had lush vegetation, or woolly mammoths would not have resided there. You had Ta'aria, later known as Hyperborea. It spoke about being tropical. Well, these weapons created mass amounts of deserts here, and also that war 110,000 years ago that we mentioned in part 1 tipped the planet off its axis, which then created hot and cold climate zones that are not natural. This whole planet had a Mediterranean climate globally. So it's not like you go and live in Canada and it's minus 60, or go and live in Africa and it's plus 60. So that's what happened. And it happened on many Earths to which the enemies had come from the Dark World. They were attracted by the riches that were in the bowels of these Earths. Sound familiar? They used flattery, again, all very familiar, the seducement program. And they wormed into the confidence of the inhabitants and then set people against each other. And this is the way wars were born in those worlds. And like I said, sounds all too familiar of what happened here 16,500 years ago also, just like the Draco and the Anunnaki. Now, when the wars were over, the rest of the survivors were exposed to Tziran rays, Tz-Iran, and people were deprived of their consciousness and will, and they mined the riches from the bowels of their earth, all submitting to the alien enemy's orders. Again, it's what's happening now. And here's the key. When the riches of those earths were exhausted and the bowels of the earth were emptied, the enemies destroyed all the people and took everything they had extracted from the earth. But when people were able to drive them out, the strangers, as it was called, sent in the fast destroyer to these earths. Now this was to be the full consequences of this planet by 2012. I want to make that quite clear. It was not the 90% depopulation plan formulated by the UN. That plan was to appease, seduce, and lie to the jackasses. The elites thinking that they were going to go with them. No. He used you all. You were his harvesting agents. Because after 2007, when Marduk pulled the plug on all of them, he then set about trying to destroy this whole planet with you on or in it. Those are the facts. And if it wasn't for the life forces, all of you so-called elites, along with every other living creature, would be dead now. That is a fact. And the sooner you all realise that as a reality, the sooner we can all heal and move forward as equals. And I mean equal. Your hierarchical titles are all fake. Another seducement to keep you all happy, whilst he collected all the treasures and assets from you. What happens when as an additional note, that was not in part 2, if you empty out a whole planet or hollow it out, the planet dies, but it still has a drive. But if you insert a drive from somewhere else, that planet or planetoid then becomes a vehicle. The thing you see in the night sky is one of them. Perrin describes the consequences of using the fast destroyer, taking as an example the fate of 2 planets, Tarora and Ruta, and he gives a detailed description of the consequences of the nuclear blows that were delivered to these planets, and it also describes the Dark Forces' strategy and tactics. Quote, he said, "This happened on many Earths to which the enemies had come from the Dark World, and we can see the picture of horror and senselessness of this space catastrophe unfolding before our inner eyes." Take note of that. Not outer eyes, inner eyes, for those who can see. Star Wars are not an invention of science fiction writers. In fact, the guy who wrote Star Wars was given help from outside. But it is the reality of the past and also the present. The fight between the light and dark forces is not some conditional concept that depends on a point of view or desire of the person who expounds on it, trying to describe himself from the best side and wishing to make the truth favourable to him. As they always say, it's the victors who write the story. His story, not our story. This fight is the fight actually not between light and dark, but between life and death. Evolutional movement forward or evolutional dead end. That's the difference between the light forces and the clowns at the Order of the Black Sun. They want to end all life, including their own. Rothschilds was right. Jackasses. But when a social parasite of the planetary level gets the possibility to act in space, he becomes very dangerous, especially if he has a weapon which can convert planets into deserts. So there you have it, the so-called elites. They left nothing behind, a barren, empty rock with zero life on or in it. One hopes they finally grasp the picture. You didn't have a golden ticket. It was an illusion. The words as such mean nothing, but only that which they reflect or transmit. Dark forces or devil, Koshis or dark Arlegs, princes of darkness or Chernobog, Draco. Mantids, raptors, reptilians, greys. The name is not important, but the essence is. Without understanding of the essence which is behind these and other words, it is easy to become a plaything in the hands of these forces. When black is declared to be white and white is black, confusion reigns. It's that mirror tech again, is it not? We've mentioned in the normal shows. Everything is the mirror, it's reversed back. Now, in order to avoid this kind of trap, it is necessary to penetrate into the sense of these words. One needs to feel them deeply in their heart, comprehend with his soul and reason, and be filled with the light of knowledge. And understanding also at the same time what is going on. Words are magic spells that the dark uses to bind us to their dark deeds. In simple terms, the essence of dark and light, of which all living things have both aspects. Yes, you heard that correct. It then comes down to choice. You are either parasitic in nature, and dark beings are parasitic, of which they feed off others. whether you are a Draco, a creator being, an angel, a human, or an animal. It makes no difference. If your whole existence is about feeding off the energy of others for selfish purposes, that in essence is the definition of being dark. Many people can have the right intentions on a face-to-face basis, but hide their true intentions in what I called the mask of illusion. We all have masks of illusion at various stages of our lives, where we fake this or we fake that. And it used to be able to cover up all kinds of weaknesses, traumas, guilt and shame, plus the more obvious scamming of people. But a change has come on a massive scale that I warned would happen back in 2016. The masks of illusion would start to come down. Not only for the cabal and the elites, but all of us. And this is why there is a total fracture in society now, as the masks no longer work like they used to. I did warn there would be a greater exposure of the criminality in our midst, and a vast volume of information and revealings would take place. And I think most would agree that has been borne out. But I also warned it would not be pretty on an individual or collective basis, as we would see many people losing it, as we call it. The reason being is their masks have worn off. They can no longer project an image of themselves as all love and light, whilst their parasitic nature remains hidden. That no longer works. And what has also happened is people noticing things a lot quicker than they used to. Why? Because you're paying more attention to it. As an example of what happens in THI, look at how quickly many of you can now spot trolls on the page compared to a few years ago. That's only a small part of it, but that also transfers into other aspects of life. People no longer tolerating vampiric family members or loved ones anymore. Do you think that's a coincidence? It's not. Those that have done their inner work, and I mean really done it, and not continued to lie to themselves, will reap far more benefits of heightened sense of awareness than those who haven't. Those that have can now clearly see those that haven't. The difference is now very marked. Now, regular listeners know I have referred to the 100 series on the TV as a good guideline to some of our past history. It's far more close to our real history than people realise, that show. And way back in time, humans chose to not remember their past lives. They made the choice due to not being able to deal with the several traumas of that time period. And in the series, it's called Taking the City of Light pill, where everyone walked around like zombies, drinking alcohol, doing drugs, and a veritable free-for-all sex orgy. Sound familiar? It should do. Those three I've just mentioned, sex, alcohol and drugs, are three of the 5 hooks that can trap you into the system. Money, obsession and religion are the other 2. All energy illusion concepts, and also all of them vampiric. drinking and drugs use brings in the spirit worlds, which have been heavily corrupted for and by the dark. All psychedelic drugs all have one thing in common. All of them are low vibrational plants. All of them. So they're not there to enlighten you, but to stifle your own development. Drugs are about forgetting life's ills, and you go to the other worlds and forget this realm for a while. And whilst there is much about this world we would all like to forget at times, is that not repeating the city of light pills? But you still have to face up to it. Once those drugs have worn off, it hasn't changed anything, has it? And the only way to really forget the problems is to face up with it, deal with it, and move on to a different and better path. Whether you call it saving your karma or by some other description, the same effect is felt. And the only way to deal with anything of that nature is to go through the pain and the trauma, process it, and let it go. Masking it, ignoring it, denying it has led us all to where we are at today. Pain, trauma, and the dark can also bring great gifts of learning on the physical and soul levels, and it all depends on how you approach it. We've spent far too long in the dark, forgetting, ignoring stages brought about by the failure to address matters on an individual level. That then developed into a collective level of us all giving away our energy, our life force, and who we are to the vampiric parasitic entity, who all too greedily sat back and just wallowed in it, in not only our essence, but our own stupidity. We handed over control on a plate, and it's time we took it back. And giant strides to that fact have been made over the past decade. So the gates were down and major traumas unfolded. And the question was asked, why does life feel so lonely here? An earth that appears to be in the middle of nowhere, while, as the text stated, that was not always the case until the gates were collapsed or closed. Now, mainstream science is only recently catching up to some of the concepts of life back then, but they are hampered by religious dogma and compartmentalization of the knowledge. All of it is wrapped up in theories, most of which is downloaded by them to confuse and distract. And that includes Einstein and Tesla. They received the downloads. Da Vinci also in some aspects, but as I understand it, a lot of those drawings he did were copies he received following a trip organised by the church to China that apparently unearthed a vast array of knowledge that was unknown at the time to the rest of the world. Now, the detailed description of the consequences of the nuclear blow on Ruther Earth fulfills this task the best way. However, Perron pronounces only a few phrases of Torora Earth, of now Torora is deserted, left without life, the multi-gate circle is torn to pieces, and the mountains are brought down on many needles. And the Slavonic Aryan Vedas mentions the multi-gate circle only once. And these words, said as if by chance, have enormous value. Now, the human consciousness simply tends to skip them because almost no one understands this concept. The point is that the gates between worlds united Earth planets into a system, into some kind of star transport network, and the working of which was provided by means of a powerful source, and obviously this source was not located on Midgard Earth. So to give you a visual, it's like a bicycle wheel with all spokes going off. That would describe the multi-gate circle. You have a centre point. Now, as I understand it, this Earth, Midgard, was that centre point, and everything went off it. And then there was the circle around it, which protected from the outside. Besides, the nature of this source was not electrical. This was the explaining the stargates. Magnetic, gravitational, or any known combination of them. Modern orthodox science has only touched the real natural laws. All forces and sources of energy which are known to it now are mere manifestations of the real force of nature, which is a result of the interaction of anisotropic space, which means having a physical property that has a different value when measured in different directions. And a simple example of that is wood, which is stronger along the grain than across it, with then mixing with matters which exist in this space. So what that's describing is the 7 primary matters that we covered in Humanity Unplugged, with the G missing. All areas of space have different properties, and it depends on the environment and also the consciousness of the region. And so you can't have life in a space-time that doesn't have the requisite properties to begin with. Consciousness has to form there before matter can be formed. And all the primary matters have to be in place to then create life as we know it, Jim. Now, the space with continuously changing properties and qualities then interacts with matters which have certain characteristics and also qualities. And as a result of the interaction of infinity with finiteness, the universe, which is partly accessible to human understanding, then originates. Now, understanding the nature of this interaction, one gets the possibility to control these natural forces, and my belief of this hidden force of gravity in the so-called dark matter is actually aether, the 5th element, which requires a light being to activate it. I may get into that later. It is pliable dependent upon its surroundings and interacts accordingly to the vibrational frequency of the space-time, but also the consciousness of living things that are immersed in that space. I hope you all grasp that. Essentially, if you, how could we put it? Let's just use America. If America has the same 7 primary matters, life can exist on America, but not the rest of the world, because it doesn't have the properties or the qualities aligned with the 7 primary matters for life on the rest of the planet to exist. That's what that portion is saying. So the operational principle of the gates between worlds is based on the understanding of the nature of the interaction of space with matters. First, the gate between worlds are united in the systems. Each of them has its own source of energy, that is. Second, each of these sources has its power limit because the qualities and properties of materials of which these field generators are made have their limitations. See, not all the matters are the same in every region. That's what that's explaining. Like I've just said, if America has all the 7 and the rest of the world doesn't, only life or materials can be made in that zone. Thus, the number of gates between worlds which can sit in each field generator is subsequently limited and depends on the distances between the planet's Earth and the qualitative state of the space that's in between them. So in other words, you cannot put a Stargate if there's no field that supports it. The system of gates between worlds can be pictured as a string of Christmas tree lights, where every bulb is a gate on a planet Earth. I will repeat again, when I'm saying planet Earth, I do not mean this planet. Earth is just an inhabited planet, of which we are one of billions. And all these bulbs shine on the tree universe only when the string is plugged into a socket. So you have to have the power source. If one bulb goes out on the Christmas tree, subsequently so does the rest of them. If someone pulls the plug, they all go out the same way. So in order to understand what this socket is, we should pay attention to Perron's words when he said the multi-gate circle is torn to pieces. The multi-gate circle, which was the outer portion of the wheel, was that socket, a region of space that could house the wheel. The Earth was at the centre. Our Earth was at the centre and all the spokes went off it, which then switches on all the bulbs at the gates between the world's string. And the force generator, the multi-gate circle, is located on one of the Earth planets, for example, Tarora Earth. And the name of this circle indicates that many gates between worlds located on different planet Earths were all united in a single hole. So it was a closed system. The pumping of this generator of force is carried out by the means of needles, which is like the spokes, which influence the space dimensionality around it and thus satiate it with streams of matter. You have to have the matter to feed the energy and supply it. And this also explains what the clowns were doing with CERN to connect to their gods again to come and save them if failed. CERN was then about opening a portal to escape instantaneously whilst the planet burned. Well, that failed as well. And the line the multi-gate circle was torn to pieces is a key in this. And what I interpret from this and from my own understanding is the very fabric of space was torn to pieces. So in other words, someone took a bolt cutter and cut all the spokes on the wheel to give you a visual understanding. And then what happens then is it leads to different properties and qualitative states that then fill in the void, but it's not the same primary matter. To restore the gates, you have to integrate the matters that were there before it went down. Those different properties means the gates collapsed in on themselves, just like a black hole. And they are still around, either in the vortex of the black hole, the singularity, or it's in the white hole, which is on the flip side of a black hole. Or it has gone through the membrane of the singularity and is now in a different universe or section of space-time. And this is the origin, in my opinion, of the Big Bang as science describes it. A blinding flash of light and then everything appears. What appears is streaming matter that went through the black hole from another universe and was advancing to a higher level of consciousness and vibration. And when the new space reaches its maximum output, it crosses the membrane and comes out of the white hole. And it's only white and blinding because it was hidden in the void or the singularity. It's like a train in a tunnel. You see a tiny white light that gets bigger and bigger until the light explodes as you get close to it. That is your Big Bang. That's what happens. And this is how this universe came to be. The right qualities for the type of life and growth were already created, and the development of another universe had reached its growth cycle and was ready to transfer to a higher growth cycle, but only when it reaches full evolutionary development. So the people, the beings, the planet, the solar system have all reached a higher level of soul development. Then go into a new region that is going to progress that species and the solar system, the stars and the galaxy. But just as the streams of water will always fall downward under the force of gravity, that's because it's being pulled by the gravity that's below our feet, is why. The streams of matter created by the needles will satiate the multi-gate circle, thus replenishing all the gates between worlds which belongs to the one system. So for our whole system to be switched off, it is enough to destroy the needles, and 7 needles are necessary within the limits of our universe, around each multi-gate circle located on a key planet, Earth. And Perrin tells his listeners exactly about this event when he said, "Mountains are brought down on many needles." And when a plug is pulled out of the socket, the whole bulb string switches off. And likewise, the nuclear blow inflicted upon Torora Earth, which was a key planet in the interstellar transport system and the place of location of the multi-gate circle, resulted in all gates connected with Torora Earth being shut. But our Midgard Earth was attached still to the Torora Earth system. The gates between worlds were then closed to Makosh and Radha. Like I said, Makosh is the Great Bear, Ursa Major, Minor, and Radha is the Orion constellation. Means that the multi-gate circle on Torora Earth connected our Midgard Earth with exactly these constellations. Now that can only have worked if those constellations were in alignment and also consciousness. So many of the gates were shut down, but not all of them, and this indicates the fact that there were stargates on Midgard-Earth which provided contact with the many constellations of our galaxy. So with all the gates between worlds which were in the Torora string then had to be switched to another key planet with a working multi-gate circle. And Perron tells the keeper of the gates exactly how to do this. For the Zarbon circle to be recovered, the spiral between worlds to shine again, you must extract the crystals of motion from the part which grows dark. So that's going back to what we were talking about earlier. The gate may have gone down, still exists, but is it in the membrane, is it in the void, or is it in the black hole, or is it in the white hole? Once it's found and put back in the right properties, it will work again. And he said you must insert the Inglia crystals instead of the outermost Svarga crystals of motion. Destined for Svarga's palaces, the light of the other world manifested in Nav will shine in the Inglia crystals, and its powerful stream will then recover the Zarbon luminescence. So what does this all mean? Well, the Svarga crystals of motion provide the ability to displace within the boundaries of our universe in our world, but they are unable to plug a bulb in a new string. And the activation of these gates, switching on the bulb, takes place when our world, our universe, is linked with the other world universes. There must be a transition from one point of our universe to another through the other world. And the point is that the natural laws of both our world universe and other worlds stop acting in the area of linking. There is a neutral area, some kind of door between the world universes, where the natural laws as we understand them don't work. And this, in my opinion, is called the singularity, the 0 point, or the void, which is a connection between the membranes of universes via black or white holes. For those of you who have travelled will have gone through a skin membrane. That's what's happening. You're going through the different universes. It has a skin. It's like a skin that you go through. Modern science gives a very simple explanation of this phenomenon. Being under the influence of certain energies, electrons break through the potential barrier, the membrane, and jump. The electrons then disappear in one place and appear in another at some distance from the place of disappearance. This is teleportation. But when the electrons disappear, they do not exist in our world universe, and this is the most important aspect to understand. This, in essence, is what I say, is teleportation. If they do not exist in our world universe, although for a very short period of time, there's a question is, where are they then? Well, the answer to this question is simple. They are in another world universe, which differs from our own qualitatively, where completely different natural laws operate. Similar phenomena are then observed when passing through the gates between the worlds. So a person enters a door in one place, and I've referenced doors many times in the shows, and appears in another place through another door that is similar to the first one. There is a principal difference. A person is not driven at a high speed like electrons in quantum tunneling, and the necessary qualitative state is created by a special device, which is the Stargate. A material is then required called Zarbin, plays the most important part in this device, or more precisely, the circle made of Zarbin. The Zarbin created the outer circle. Now, there are many gates across this planet. Like I said earlier, one of the more obvious doors is by Lake Titicaca, a doorway into the mountain. Most mountains, and certainly volcanoes, are portals of some kind or other. Now, that access has been totally cut off from the SS small p, SS being the operative word, and all military on this planet, as they were being controlled by the others. And also rogue families with high elements of DNA, non-human, hello, Rothschilds. And for those who are new, the SSP is a breakaway faction of those elements, and they're not here to be helpful to us. Never were. So if you have seen the pictures of the gateway by Lake Titicaca, you will see the evidence stated in the Vedas text, where it says the gates between worlds are now fused stone. And when you see the picture of that door, you are likely looking at the evidence of one of the fused gates. So how is this fixed? Well, the dark will do anything to not have people cooperating and working stuff out together. But we are many, and many are now waking up to the reality of ours and many others' combined situations. Having spent many years, lifetimes and reincarnations getting to a point of solving this problem and restoring worlds, raising consciousness, understanding in harmony with all others. Just like the great teachers, the heirs had accomplished before disaster struck. We'll be back shortly. Hi all, and welcome back. Yes, those that went through those gates had to be of a certain frequency to be able to access them. Those of you are commenting on the chat, and the reason why is the consciousness was a lot higher back then than it is now. And that's why now it's only a few that are able to go through those gates or handle certain vaults or trinkets or God's toys, shall we say. Because you have to have developed the self and be responsible for it. That's the problem with these fake gods and these dark lords and overlords. They never worked on themselves. They just cheated. Well, they might be able to cheat people, but they can't cheat what the light forces put in place and Source put in place a long time back. No matter how hard they try. Also, at times it's a bit, hello, McFly, no understand, eh? as soon as you see an even shine of the spiral on Zarbon's circle, you must change the crystals back as they were, because the other world will be in front of you. Know the light of the other world is baneful. It takes the radiation of souls. And mind dims in the rays of the other world, powerless to understand what is happening with the soul. And the life of unreasonable, soulless creatures does not go to Svarga, but it goes to hell. And there they pine away in darkness, knowing neither themselves nor what has happened. This is an interesting verse. To change you back via the crystals, you will see the other world again, riddled with irradiated souls. And that's the problem, that the other side of the gate has been obliterated. And this proves there was nuclear weapons here long before the last century. As I keep saying in the shows, technology is not new or science fictional future, but it is the past. They just introduce it at certain times to fulfill an agenda. Now, the second part mentions something that only recently has been made aware of, the soulless creatures, which we have covered in a few shows. In the final judgment, they will not survive. As we transition into a new phase of space-time that is more conducive to soul growth and evolutionary development of the living organic souls in here, phase and shift. So this was a traumatic time for many billions of souls, and why Perron then appeared before the Keeper of Ways after D'Aria had sank into the ocean abyss, because the nearest moon, Layla, had fallen on Midgard Earth, which I was shown recently. Oh dear. The reason for his appearance was the damage of the permanent interplanetary transport network called the System of Gates, and the greater part of this system is deactivated because of the nuclear blow inflicted by dark forces to a key planet. Now, the Star Wars between light and dark forces has lasted for dozens of thousands of years, and our Midgard Earth, for several reasons, has an important value for both sides. More precisely, the dark forces try to take it, while the light forces try to prevent this. The dark forces need to occupy Midgard Earth, not initially to destroy it. Otherwise, they would have used a nuclear weapon a long time ago. Now, at the time of writing this, Nikolai Levashov was not aware of the extinction plan laid out for 2012. They only destroyed after they collected everything. So clearly they didn't have everything. And what has took place in this century is the trinkets of which people do not realize the value of, the likes of the 7 arcs, were collected and moved out of their reality to then be able to take everything with them. And this is why, going back to the 1940s, the Order of the Black Sun, better known as the Nazis, was seeking all these trinkets. They needed to collect everything. And they did this, like I said, on many other planets. And as it follows from the Slavonic Aryan Vedas, the appearance of their bulwarks, which is bases, on Layla, which was the nearest moon to us at the time, there was 3, confirms their aspiration to seize our Earth, not destroy it. That would come later. And Perrin, as the representative of the hierarchy of the Union of Civilizations, in which our planet was granted a membership at that time as a colony of migrants from other planets, which were the members of this interstellar light forces union. And they came to Midgard Earth in the period of the next tension between the light and dark forces. And he passed on the information about the interplanetary network breakage and the necessary actions for its renewal, and reported about a fundamentally new tactic and strategy applied by the Dark Forces during their offensive actions against civilizations, members of the Light Forces Union, and also gave out information about the supposed actions of Dark Forces and their consequences concerning Midgard Earth. And this was covered in another verse, the Volkov Scimitars. Volkov means wizard. From the glorious clan of the Sviato Rusov, asked, "Tell us, Father Perun, what will happen to the saint land of the great race, and with the faith of our ancestors? If a severe time will come for the sons of the great race, who will be able to save the saint land of the great race and the descendants of the celestial clan?" Now, a terrible ordeal approached our Earth, Midgard Earth, and a direct contact with the Legion of Dark Forces, which devoured everything healthy and strong like a cancer tumour. Our planet was destined to become a ground or a base for these parasitic forces, and it was inevitable because of a certain periodical processes that were happening in the universe at that time. Then the light forces did not possess the abilities to resist the dark forces, so that they could protect themselves from aggression and completely neutralize the enemy. And this is why all these gods' trinkets, shall we call them, the ark, the shield, the sword, the hammer, all have extra qualities that are needed to take on the dark forces. Clearly they didn't have them. Our Midgard Earth was extremely important for light forces because they attempted to create a new qualitative civilization of light forces which would possess a level of power inaccessible for anyone, when it would be possible to influence the global processes of the universe by the force of mind. So what the light forces were doing was essentially being implemented by the Urs in connection with the peoples of Rus and the Slavonic people, which then they taught them the higher soul development level and then asked them to go out and teach others across the planet. This then raises the consciousness and the vibration, which then pushes this planet and the solar system into a new area of space where we would have more switched on abilities. Once you've reached that level, you then should be responsible with those abilities. So dark forces coming in, with your power of your mind, you can stop them. That's what this is saying. And yes, it does work. You don't need weapons. You just need, when you're in a certain zone of space with that soul development, your own essence can counteract the dark forces. And this is what the light forces have been trying to do on this planet and several other planets. So everything and everyone lives in harmony. But these vampiric psychopaths, who are parasites, continue. Now, unfortunately, that plan back then, the dark forces knew about it, and they undertook one attempt after another to seize Midgard Earth, and they wanted very much to take advantage of the results created by light forces. And this is a typical approach of a social parasite. Piggybacking, they call it. Draco have tried to piggyback on humanity for thousands of years because they're incapable, it seems, of raising their own soul development. Now, the dark forces has learned the lessons of past defeats and dramatically changed their strategy and tactics of actions, possessing certain knowledge and abilities of a parasite, and they began to penetrate through the immature elements of the light forces. This is why everyone has to lift each other up, not drag each other down. You can't elevate yourself above somebody else. You have to elevate everyone. And that's important going forward. And they skillfully played on ambitions and spiritual blindness, and they created situations when through these elements they could get very important information about the systems of protection of the Earth planets which were on the light forces side. And this has echoes of today, where people with ambitions sell themselves out, and everyone else out for that matter, for their own selfish purposes. I did a piece a while back about the two main issues we face: fear and seducement, as far too many of us are sold out to the dark forces for fame, wealth and fake titles. King this, Pindar that. It's all an illusion of control that too many people with a lack of morals and a weakness all too easily succumb to. And that's why the cooperative model works, because everyone's the same. There doesn't need to be a hierarchy. We just need to be and work together for the common cause and the common goal, which is harmony and abundance of life. Basics for everybody. After that, it doesn't matter. But at that time of that war, when nature itself, unfortunately, involuntarily favoured them, and it was a periodic change of the streams of primary matter, which form both our and other universes, that created an Achilles heel for the light forces at that time. The domination of one or another primary matter in the overall streams of primary matter dramatically influences the evolutional development of reasoning creatures at their initial stage of development. And the dark forces used precisely this temporal evolutionary vulnerability of young and developed civilizations to strike. So what this is explaining is humanity was about, and other species that were here, was about to go through a developmental transition back then, 110,000 years ago, and like now, dark forces tried to ramp it up and stall or prevent it. This time, it will be different. The power and density fluctuations of one or another primary matter streams are at times periodical. Each world universe has its own order of the primary matters which dominate in the overall stream, and it is determined by the quantitative and qualitative structure of each world universe. The domination of streams of certain primary matters can cause instability and vulnerability in people and create favourable conditions for the dark forces to influence the civilizations. And this is why in the past they were trying to elevate all the people. Because once all the people are elevated, the dark can't touch us. It just can't. The power of your own mind blocks them. On their initial interplanetary phases of development, when the majority of reasoning creatures have not crossed the area considered to be dangerous for the positive evolutional development. Now, what this speaks to and of is the awake and unawakened in our midst. They failed to heed the many calls, failed to address any of the symptoms of the dark within themselves or collectively. And this is why I said a few years ago, it's too late for them now. It's too late. Nothing too bad will happen to them, but they will have to face their own judgments and remembrances. And our own judgments are often far more severe than external ones. They will go on for more development phases, as I understand it. It should also be noted that no one who listens to this or any other alt media shows is responsible for others not awakening themselves. Each person is responsible ultimately only for themselves. That's why it's called personal responsibility, that sadly oh so few actually exhibit. So please don't beat yourselves up because those close to you failed themselves. That's the key word. They failed themselves. And you should not carry any guilt for the failure of others. And I'm asking for you all to reinforce that to yourselves. No guilt, no shame, and no regrets. It's down to them. They failed themselves. Not because of you, or because of me, or because of anybody else. And so the dark forces use precisely this time and this evolutional stage of a development for capturing reasoning creatures and converting them into obedient instruments, slaves. And if a civilization succeeded in general in getting through the dangerous evolutional window, all the following fluctuations of the power and density of the primary matter streams do not have any serious negative influence for the evolutional development of that civilization. Now, fortunately for us on Midgard Earth, the dark forces steered to greater activity, timing their next attempt exactly to the beginning of the period when we were crossing the dangerous, what is called the dangerous evolutional window. That is your east and west gate, by the way. And the next verse tells the following: "No people, the stream of the river of time will bring hard times to the sacred land of the great race." Now, for those who don't know, the sacred land of the great race was the Arya, which was later known as Hyperborea, and also Thule and Russia. Only priest keepers of the ancient knowledge and secret wisdom will remain on this land, because people will use the force of Midgard Earth's elements and destroy the small moon together with their beautiful world, which is exactly what took place. And the circle of Svarog will turn then, and the human souls will be horrified. Only the priest keepers of the ancient knowledge and secret wisdom will remain on this land, it says. What this could well be describing is what is known as the elders. And we explain the elders in the Shane shows, who have lived for thousands of years. I think the oldest was 130,000 years old. But people should take note, these are not related to any fake Chinese elders, the RV clans. So only the higher caste of priest keepers were able to avoid the danger of the dark forces' influence. So this goes back to what I said earlier. They've developed themselves to such a high level that the dark forces cannot influence. They cannot target, they cannot attack. That's the beauty of doing your soul development work and jumping the planes, getting out of the astral. And if you're going to mire yourself in low vibrational thinking, anger, envy, bitterness, you are never going to escape that level. Because once you get on the mental planes and your junk DNA switches on, you have to be responsible. But if you're mired in envy and anger and reactionary thinking, someone's called me a blah blah, so I'm going to hit him with my sword, is not being responsible on those levels. That creates more war, more violence. And so these priest keepers avoided the dark forces' influence because they've already passed the intraplanetary cycle of evolutionary development and therefore are immune to it. That's why your inner work and your shadow work is also important. All the others who failed in completing this evolutional stage of their development would be unable to withstand the virus, as they call it. And as stated earlier, it is clear this planet was in part used as a safe house for refugees fleeing war and destruction on their home worlds. And this is kind of why I get a bit pissy with people saying we don't want refugees or immigrants in our country. It's just wrong on so many levels. And the question is, what if most of the souls resided here currently are all refugees? Does that then change your opinion? For those who won't welcome refugees in their time of need, perhaps they need to think and act differently with the new knowledge that's available. Hi all and welcome back. Where do we go next? The War of Atlantis, not Atlantis. There's a significant difference. And the described events reflect the consequences of the armed conflict between the ancient Slavonic Aryan Empire and the Antlands and its province, which had separated from it. And it happened over 13,000 years ago. The war for world domination resulted in the planetary catastrophe when the small moon Fata was destroyed and its fragments fell down on Midgard Earth, causing tremendous natural cataclysms. This is not to be mixed up with the earlier moon that fell, Layla. That was 110,000 years. This was around 14,000 years ago, which caused the flood. And the axis at that time of Midgard Earth changed its angle to 23.5 degrees. And the circle of Svarog will turn then, it is said. And what happened is the continental plates began to move, causing powerful earthquakes and also volcanic eruptions. And this, I suspect, is when America became one landmass pretty much. It used to be three, not one. The Rockies region was the beach, not California. That was another portion of land out of the Pacific which crashed into the land, which then closed up the Mississippi, not entirely, but the Mississippi was a lot wider back then, and there was an East and West America defined by the Mississippi. America was in three pieces. So the clouds of volcanic ash were thrown into the higher layers of the atmosphere and hid what they call the Urillo sun. And twilight set in for a long time. Vast areas of dry land sank into the ocean abyss while others emerged from it. And the waters of the Atlantic Ocean hid in its depths the rebellious Antlian Atlas forever. Now, as I understand it, there was a portion of land, but the majority of that world, Atlantis, was a craft that sank. New mountain ranges rose at once, which is why you had the Rockies. And we also had a river that ran through the middle of the Himalayas, which is now no longer there, remember. And giant tsunamis turned around Midgard Earth several times, and the climate was dramatically changed. And all this cast Midgard Earth civilization from the intergalactic level to the level of almost complete savagery, with rare islands of civilization which the priest keepers managed to preserve. Kind of also confirms the earlier thing about them being the elders. So Perrin warned his people precisely about these events. The great night will wrap Midgard Earth, and the celestial fire will destroy many lands of earth. Vast deserts will be there where wonderful gardens flowered. Seas will be rolling on where life-giving dry land was, and the high mountains covered by eternal snows will appear, where sea waves washed. And all this took place around 13,027 years ago, which was around 3,000 years after the Draco arrived here, stating they were coming here to save us, whilst all the time plotting with the dark forces to gain maximum advantage. Now, if the keepers of the ways are the elders that Shane referenced, they did advise humanity to not align with the Draco, and that advice was ignored. And since then, the elders have sat back and watched us fail. It's a case of you made your bed and lie in it. Now, up until 2014, there were still 11 elders here from that time. And I tried with Shane to arrange a meeting of how they could help us in the now, but it seems they were too far into the pockets of the Draco, and that meeting was refused or ignored. Now, during 2015, it was relayed to me that 2 of those elders had left, and at least one of them was due to suicide. And it should be noted for listeners, those at the top end of the game appear to have a no-kill policy, but the efforts of the Dark is to get people into a state whereby they take their own lives. Now, this is has a rather devastating karmic effect on the individual in the next and subsequent lives as they drop down a scale of personal evolution. So that's the ones at the top end of the game. They are reluctant or find it difficult to kill them off. Maybe because of the higher soul development, whereby they just create issues to then make people take their own lives. Now, during the war between the Slavonic Aryan Empire and the Antlian, nuclear weapons and the PSI-influenced forces of nature were applied, and the conditions then were described clearly in this piece. People will hide in caves from the poisoned, death-bearing rains, and will eat the flesh of animals because the fruits will be filled with poisons, and having eaten them, many people will die. The poisoned streams of water will bring death to the children of the great race and the descendants of the celestial clan, and thirst will make people suffer. It reduced Midgard-Earth civilization from the level of a colony of the enormous union of light forces to a level of primitive savagery. In times of full strife, the lessons learned, it seems, can return to us in an instant, back to the primitive. And for everyone, and everyone for themselves mode, and the subsequently have and have nots are then aligned with the divide and conquer. And the reason for this horrible situation was purely down to the spiritual immaturity of Antlin's higher caste, not Earth's. The Antlins were spiritually immature, and the representatives of which, beyond measure carried away by technology and forgetting about the spiritual aspect of development, possessing knowledge sufficient to create high technologies, they nevertheless remained spiritually immature. Now you know why I warn of technology. People will use it as a lazy crutch rather than working on themselves, and without realizing they are the technology. And the conditions for inharmonious development had originated in the midst of this civilization created by the migrants, natives of one of the Slavonic Aryan tribes, the Ants, and in the course of time led to the desire of dominating the whole world, which is the Draco and the Mantids. But the Mantids and the Ant people are two separate beings, by the way, just to be clear. These distorted souls became a nutrient medium for the Dark Forces virus, and also created an environment which allowed the Dark Forces' secret emissaries to penetrate into our planet. Star parasites succeeded in penetrating Midgard-Earth from this moment on, and the nuclear catastrophe which happened 13,000 years ago became inevitable. This is why the ETs that arrived here in volumes from 1940s onwards went into panic mode, because we started setting off nuclear weapons again. That's why they turned up, because we're still connected on a frequency basis to their world. So if the nuclear goes off on our world, it also goes off in their world. We're far more connected than people realise. So ours became one of the Earth planets infected by the Dark Forces virus. And this could well be related to the fractal virus that was described in our shows in Cosmic Voice and also in greater detail by Sunfire and also Tanath. And the secret preparation of the representatives of Antlin's ruling caste, who were infected with this virus for taking the power on the planet by force, resulted in the nuclear war, which in turn resulted in the catastrophe which eliminated the majority of those who were affected by the dark virus. However, there were small groups of the higher hierarchy of the Antlins who managed to board Vitmanas and Vitmaras at the moment of the catastrophe, survived and became those dark forces seeds with fruits we harvest even now. This is exactly what they were going to do with CERN. Destroy it, then come back and take over. With seeds that they harvest, we were the seeds. Now, following the advice of strangers who secretly arrived on Midgard Earth, people will start to take the life of each other for the sake of a sip of fresh water and a piece of clean food, and they will forget the ancient wisdom and the laws of the God Creator, which is Source. The great disunion will come to the world of Midgard, and only the priest keepers of the sacred land of the great race will keep the purity of the ancient knowledge, despite all ordeals, privations, and death. So essentially, the Earth inhabitants of our planet had now become infected by the Dark Forces virus. And Midgard Earth was isolated from the other Earth planets of the Light Forces, and the gates between worlds on our Midgard Earth were disconnected from the transport light system of life force civilizations to prevent that virus then penetrating other planets. And we were put into quarantine, which will last until our planet rids itself of this virus, thus getting immunity to it, or it is destroyed by the dark forces. There are no other options. And it's safe to say we are in one of those times now, whereby certain people on this planet have cleansed themselves sufficiently of the virus and its temptations of the dark ways. And this is why everything now currently is in chaos. One desperate group, or two, clinging onto the old paradigm, which despite their protestations to the contrary, has failed. Oops. And we have one group pushing forward with the new paradigm and a potential return to the old way of being that was taught by the teachers to the general populace and then spread out across the lands. So because they had penetrated our Earth and the gates got switched off, and the danger of further penetration through the gates to other planets which were connected to our Earth, that all occurred. And that is why currently those gates do not function at present, and they will not function until our planet is free from the influence of the interstellar parasitic system. We have made giant strides in that, trust me. Now, the Russian language has preserved some traces which indicate the use of the gates in the past. The word to leap, sigat, meant the same then as it means now, except for the fact that one leap, not from one step to another, but from one planet to another through the gates between worlds. And this adds a whole new meaning and understanding of the term one leap for man, one giant leap for mankind, does it not? The point is that a sig in the Slavonic Aryan tradition is a time unit equal to approximately 1/300 billionth of a fraction of a second. And accordingly, the word sigat initially meant almost instantaneous transition from one point of space to another. And that's what used to take place on here through the gates between worlds, or the process of what is better known as teleportation. 1/300 billionth of a fraction of a second was the time it took to go from Earth to the other side of the universe. Which is why I talk about we don't need tin cans. So there are traces of the great past in Russian. We need only to think about the sense of the words which we use every day. The night of the Svarog, which has lasted for the last millennium, is over now, and the dawn of the day of the Svarog has already begun. And the dark forces have no chance of waiting for a new night of Svarog to try again to take complete control over Midgard Earth. It's too long. They know we're going to develop in this next time of the day of Svarog. Whilst it's the night, they can play and they can hamper. Not in the day. It doesn't work like it used to. And humanity has to take the next step along the evolutionary ladder during the day of Svarog. And if this happens, the next night of Svarog will not help the dark forces to attain their goal. Why? Because, as I explained earlier, we've advanced to a level where we become immune to it. And that's why this time period in our lifetime, everyone who listens to this show, was so important. They had to complete it. By 2012, it failed. And they know this perfectly well, and this is the reason why the last night of Svarog was the most terrible and bloodiest of all previous nights. The dark parasitic forces had almost succeeded in gaining their object, especially during the last century of the night, which ended in 1996. So the next 1,000 years, the day of the Svarog, is all about the progression of the species and our spiritual and evolution developments, which will ultimately restore the common bond we had with the other 27 Earths that were connected to the gate. For those with negative thought processes, this does not mean it will take 1,000 years to complete. This version of humans is the most creative of all the different races by far. We develop more in 10,000 years what the Draco take 120,000 years. And it is expected that it will take 40 years before the full changes are made on this planet. But we will all see and have seen great changes just in the last few years. but there is 489 currently different aspects of life that has to be deleted, corrected, or totally altered or improved during that time period. We have 1,000 years. Doesn't mean to say we have to take 1,000 years. But the biggest key to that is the same as all developing species. The offspring. They have to be taught or others brought in to teach them. So they go on to teach the next generation. By that time, the two older generations that are here on this planet now will have passed on and taken with them the few with development or the majority with their over-programmed hive mind thinking with them. The program will die out. Because if you teach the children, who then go on to teach the next generation of children, the old program is then gone. It's the older generations who are programmed with that hive mind, ant-like, or bug-like mind control program will have all died with it. And what you're left then is people who grew up with the first generation of children taught, and in part grew up with the old programmed hive mind. They're going to be a minority. And this then sets the stage for humanity to really go on a fast drive forward of personal and collective development. Will there still be issues? Likely, for the next 10 years, I would think. But as more gets exposed, there is less of them to propagate the dark system of control up, whereby it will become and be considered almost a laughingstock to continue in the failed ways of the past. It doesn't take much to make things viral. And remember, it is us who provided them with their platform to operate. We are their batteries. Well, if the batteries take back their own power, they have nothing left to run on. And then, in a huge piece of irony, it is they who will turn on each other and devour themselves. Just like they did to us in the past. Karma and irony, it seems, can be a bitch. Now, many people would love to travel on a spacecraft. Many of you may not realise you already have. Oops. And that wasn't a pleasant experience for most who endure that. And the next topic will be all about crafts that were used here in the time of the Rus and the Slavonic Aryan race. There were two main craft that were used here by the Urs and the people, Vitmanas and Vitmaras. And in addition to the gates between worlds, our ancestors used spaceships for Vitmanas for displacing to other Earth planets. And in the past, Vitmanas were used for reaching the planets that did not have stargates. So let us remember that the gates should be installed on a sending planet and also a receiving one. And here are the following reasons for the absence of any gate on any specific planet. 1. The planet has reasoning life, but is not a member of the given union of civilizations for one reason or another. 2. A planet has reasoning life, but its civilization is at the initial stage of development and therefore is not ready for interstellar contacts, which is essentially our planet now, if truth be told. 3. A planet does not have reasoning life and therefore only research bases on it. 4. A planet does not have life and is not of any interest to the union of civilizations. And 5. A planet is unknown to the union of civilizations. So the Vitmanas were also used for space travelling between planets that did not have the gates between worlds. They were used for cargo and people transportation for long distances and for short distances within the boundaries of one planet. So there was a tale in a book called The Brave Falcon, which kind of referenced this travel that was mentioned also in the Vedas, where it says, "Then the brave falcon said loudly, 'Farewell, my fair maiden. If you need me, you will find me, although I will be far away. Before you can see me, you must cross 3 by 9 earths and come to the 3 and 10th palace.'" So what that is saying is you have to go past 13 constellations and also 27 earths. Not in this palace, in the others. And it is said you will wear out 7 pair of iron boots and eat 7 iron loaves. So what do 3 by 9 earths mean? Where or what is it? It is a distance or a location of some place. Well, it's actually both things. Like I said earlier, our ancestors called other planets Earths, and 3 by 9 Earths means 27 planets, described as the Urilla Sun system. So that's 27 planets within our whole galaxy, which in meaning is the central, when they call it the Urilla Sun system, is the central spiritual sun, not the sun of the solar system itself. There's a difference. Which was the number of the inhabited planets united in the one system. That doesn't, by what they're describing by that, is not one solar system, the system of the gates. Well, as we were talking about it earlier, there was 4 constellations that were part of that one system. So these 27 planets constituted the United Interstellar System, which had one hierarchy, a unified system of laws, and most likely one and the same culture and language for communication, which was the Old Russian, which has changed very little since then. Moreover, the Brave Falcon indicates in what constellation this planet of the Urilla Sun seemed to be, in the 3rd and 10th palace, i.e. he will be in the 13th constellation of the system, which corresponds to the Slavonic Aryan name of the constellation of Finest on the circle of Svarog. And for his loved one to get there, she must cover the 3 by 9 far distances, which is the 27 planets. Thus, if we know the meaning of the words and understand their original sense, a few phrases dropped by the book called The Brave Falcon will transform into the precise coordinates of the place where she will find him. And in her sleep, Nastenka had heard the Brave Falcon's words, and in the morning decided to go searching for him, having a clear idea of where she could find what was promised. At first, she had to find a spaceship, a Vitmana, to travel to the other Earth planets. And it was said it was a very long journey, and she crossed open country. This is in Russia, called the Airman Woods and the High Mountains. Birds sang songs to her in the fields. Remember, we were connected to the animals and the birds far more back then. And the Airman Woods welcomed her. She admired the whole world from the high mountains, and she finally reached an astounding valley from which trade Vitmanas took off into the boundless heavens. So they allowed her to board their trade Vitmana, and she left for the long journey to the place which lay 3x9 far distances from Midgard Earth. And after a long way, she reached an astounding valley from which the Vitmanas took off. This means that she knew about the landing strips for the spaceships, the trade Vitmanas. And it also proves that there were trade Vitmanas there, and there was trade relations between Midgard Earth and the 27 other planets as part of the one system. Now, the fact that the landing space grounds exist can be proved with solid confirmations which no skeptic can dispute. Back in 1999, Professor Chuvrov found a stone plate in the southern part of the Urals, near a village called Chandar, and this plate proved to be a relief map of the West Siberian region and the rivers Belaya, Ufimskaya, and Sutalka. Even today, it's impossible to create a map that is similar to this one, it is said. Now, in addition to the natural landscape, it has two systems of channels with a general extension of 12,000 kilometers and a width of 500 meters each, and also 12 dams that were 300 to 500 meters wide, up to 10 kilometers long and 3 kilometers deep. And second, there were several diamond-shaped strange platforms near these channels that were positioned on the map. And the image on the surface of the map was made on a 1:1 scale at 1 kilometre. Now, on these stone plates, there's some written signs in the form of hieroglyphic syllabic letters, which for some reason were at once considered to be the old Chinese language, and later this was proven to be not true. This is the origin of the runes that is talked about in Nordic history. That's where that come from, the Rus, or the Ers. And this turned out to be a three-dimensional map containing details that the mapping of which demands at the least the existence of an artificial satellite and technologies unknown to modern civilization. Oops. Like I said, technology is the past, not the future. And Chuvrov also discovered the Governor General of the city of Ufa in the archival documents of the 18th century, where the latter mentions 200 of these white stone plates, which were all found around this Chandar village. And it is supposed that when they're all put together, they formed a three-dimensional map, not only of the region, but the whole planet. You know? And when he went on a new expedition, they found a second stone plate that confirms the archival information. Now, it is improbable that all plates could be found but what has already been found is sufficient to prove that a highly developed civilization existed on Midgard-Earth, which is a member of the system which united many civilizations of the galaxy quite recently, 13 to 15,000 years ago. So that's the archaeological evidence supporting the proof of the Vedas, and also mentioned in the book The Brave Falcon. So the finding of these volumetric maps totally confirms the information from the Slavonic Aryan Vedic texts, and it then turns into a reliable source of information about the past of our civilization. Now, these diamond-shaped platforms served as landing grounds for the Vitmanas. And what Shuvryov found out is that several grounds of different forms, from diamond-shaped to three-cornered, and different sizes, were all dotted on this relief map. Now, it is said the purpose for these grounds remain a mystery to the researchers. However, what is ascertained from it is that they're nothing but landing strips for the Vitmanas and also the Vitmaras of different purposes and different sizes. For, as an example, the size of the diamond-shaped grounds is absolutely enormous, and most likely served for the Vitmaras to take off and land. Now, to clarify the situation, the information from the Slavonic Aryan texts about the purpose of our ancestors' ships, the Vitmaras, were what you would call today the mother spaceships, and they could carry 144 Vitmanas inside of them. Most likely Vitmaras were spaceships of intergalactic connection and also reconnaissance, like scout craft. And it's kind of sad the way this planet has gone. How we could just hop on a craft and hop across the bloody universe, or even to the next galaxy, and it all got stripped away. But we will return. But to do that, we have to improve ourselves on an individual and a collective level. So what this proves then is, back in time, we were both travellers of time and space, as the song says. This is the final portion of the show. I've just told Holly we have an admin test to see how much they remembered of this show at 9 a.m. tomorrow, which she told me to go away politely, or perhaps not. Right, let's get into the final portion of wrapping up part 2. And pay attention to the following lines in the tale that was mentioned earlier. Eamon Woods welcomed her. This is pointing towards the fact we were connected with the forest at the time, the trees, the animals, the birds. And she admired the whole world from the high mountains, and she finally reached an astounding valley from which the trade Vitmanas flew into the boundless heavens. Now, the words Eamon Woods say nothing to modern man, but Eamon Woods covered the slopes of the Eamon Mountains, which is the old name for the Urals, which were later called the Riphean Mountains. So we've already heard about the group of teachers known as the Urs, who went on to teach man, and they clearly became one when you break down the names of the places in Russia. Man, the co-joining of the two. the Ers and man. Remember, Arya means man also. And the main set of mountains in Russia is the Urals, or the Ur and Al. Al, like El, means God. Not in the God we understand that word now, but back then it just meant a higher evolved being. And these beings had gone through their initial development on a planetary level and several levels of galactic level and universal level and so on, to be able then to spread their wisdom amongst the developing species on several planets. This can be the job of the children of the future. If you reach a higher level, you then go to the other worlds to teach, which is what the Ers did. The Ers came from Ursa Minor. Now, the name, UR, is also in 3 of our planets, Saturn, Mercury, and Uranus. Do you think that's a coincidence? Or maybe why American spellings have dropped the U before the R in many words? Colour spelt with an O-U-R, not O-R. Or the fact there is a place in Russia that far predates the Middle East version called Jerusalem. It was actually called Jerusalem. Oops, that will rattle a few people, no doubt. U-R-U-S-A-L-E-M. So let's break it all down. Rus, Salem. Are the teachers, Rus were the learners and tasked to spread the message of light, and Salem means peace. Jerusalem was the original name in Russia of what is now known as Jerusalem. The teacher, the student, teaching a message of light and peace. And even the current Jerusalem was not the only one, as Constantine created Jerusalem as Constantinople. Then you have the UK, and one of their most favourite hymns is the same title, Jerusalem. And a line in the song tells you it's not a fixed place, but is transient. And it says, and was Jerusalem builded here amongst these dark satanic mills? I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. Now that was written in 1804 in relation to a story of Jesus with Joseph of Arimathea, who travelled to England, then known as Albion, then on to Glastonbury. Now I have spoken to people who have recall of the time of the teacher, more commonly known as Jesus. And there are depictions of it in hidden paintings and murals, most of which have been denied by the church. And the people I've spoken to, all of them say he had blue eyes. Blue eyes are not native to Middle Eastern climes, apart from one country, which is Iran. But they are native to more northern climes, and the peoples known as the Aryans. Well, the meaning of the word Iran is the land of the Aryans. There's your connection. But the question is, what if Jesus was really a fake name given by the Roman Church for a specific agenda, and the real Jesus was Russian or Rus and had blue eyes. Is there further evidence to support the people known as Jesus and Mary Magdalene were not from the Middle East? Well, yes, there is. Depictions in the Last Supper and other art pieces hidden mainly, but that I have been able to view a few of them. Mary Magdalene was a blue-eyed blonde. She lived eventually in France under the protection of the Cathars until a Roman Church Knights military killed her after hunting her and her children down for years. But her last child managed to flee before they slayed her and all of her followers. But if you think the crimes of the Roman Catholic Church are new, think again. They've been a blight on humanity from day one, and they ran and operate on behalf of the dark forces. Period. Jesus' real name was Radomir. Why do you think the Russians called their space station Mir? And it is my belief that he was part of the Ers teachers and Mary was one of the Rus. But it's also possible they were both Ers also. Both of them were special people with highly developed souls, which then brings abilities. Nikolai and Svetlana Levashov also had the same special abilities. Both were slain by the same dark system. But their memories and also Radomir and Mary's will live on. And we should thank them for their services to humanity. But the question remains to be seen and listened to is, why does society only listen after these teachers of light have already died? A lesson we must all learn, it seems. And in some aspects, the name can be seen as not being important. Others, due to word magic, are. But the teachings and ways are of ultimate importance. The main people of the Ers named were Perun, whose son was Tark, and his wife Tara, the latter being important as the crystals in her name are the ones to fix the gate. Tara travelled to Ireland, and there is a hill of Tara named as a sacred place there. What is common of the Irish race? Blue eyes. Who sent armies to destroy the Irish and their history? The Roman Catholic Church. Oops. They sent the Dutch kings after them, William of Orange and all. You see, it's all about erasing history for them, so they can rewrite their own bullshit narrative. History, it seems, is not what it appears to be, does it? Our truth of what happened here on Midgard is distorted beyond all reason. But there are these shows, the truth for you, and that is now your choice. One hopes it makes you think and act in a different way, and also research these topics for yourself. The truth, they say, never fears investigation. And yet we are denied knowledge on a plethora of things on this planet. Why? Because they wish to continue to leave us floundering in the dark and only when the faith comes through will we begin to heal and go forward again. The gist of this piece was not to denigrate whole peoples, far from it. The gist is to combine all peoples together as one with a common enemy. And we can only do that from a position of full knowledge. It may well get attention that it's targeting the Jewish or the religions or the black people of the past. But might I remind listeners, I've spent way more time on our shows highlighting the crimes of the white race also. And yet I don't hear anyone complaining you're denigrating all whites. Bushes, Clintons, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Blair, Churchill, the UK and EU royals, the British Empire, the Dutch Empire, Nazis, some of them anyway. All these groups are predominantly white, but they were being ran by the sub-grey race. And yet no one complained I was denigrating white people. So one hopes some will not see this piece and use it as an excuse to deflect and distract under the banner of racism. As what has been made clear with these shows is that colours, races and countries did not matter to the various peoples. Be it the Ayrs, the Rus and the Slavonic Aryans met only to teach them to change from the dark forces' ways, which was bloodshed and sacrifice. So they didn't care about colour. They just cared about people. Otherwise, why would Iran, who are not white-skinned per se, name their country the land of the Aryans? And coincidentally, that was the original site of the Manna Kingdom. Manna means a divinely supplied spiritual nourishment, which is why Kim named the original that name. We cannot allow the continuation of stifling the narrative under the banner of it offends this or that. If those people are that shallow in their understanding that criticising poor behaviour and at times heinous behaviours of their particular culture, either in the past, now or the future, is deemed racist or wrong, then you've not only lost any moral fortitude, but also what it means to be human. It's about love, it's about compassion, understanding, caring and sharing, and not violence, anger, greed and self-serving. And we have a real chance now to go forward for a better world for the all. And we can only do that by coming together and learning the truth together, no matter how harsh it is. Truth is painful and also traumatic, but it's also a life lesson. And if history keeps ignoring life lessons, we will continue to endure the devastatingly corrupt, perverted and also dark world we see today. And it's time we all learned to be a beacon of truth, have large doses of humility, and engineer a new spirit that was set out so far back by the Ayrs, the Rus and the Slavonic Aryan race. Back then, the word faith, in its original meaning, and is nothing to do with religion. The word faith meant enlightenment of knowledge. And it's time we all relearned to collect, absorb, take actions, and learned to keep it. Keep the faith. I'll be back at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday. My name's Thomas Williams. Bye for now.